Okay, we have Mr. Stephen Fletcher, former Global Manufacturing Excellence Director at Unilever, joining us for the 50th TPM anniversary video. So, Steve, did you know that this year is the 50th anniversary for TPM?
Yes, I was aware of the fact, simply because I remember when it was the 25th year, I did my TPM instructor training in Japan. So I joined Unilever in about 74 and worked in many functions across Unilever. Typical Unilever being a multinational, I was expatriated a few times, roles mainly in manufacturing, engineering, supply chain. I was initially involved in TPM. Actually, I first heard of TPM, which I know you're going to ask me, when I was working in the United States in about 1989, 1990. I heard and I picked up some books about TPM because I was running engineering projects and maintenance. And I started to read about TPM. In 1991, 92, I came back to the UK and joined a manufacturing excellence team. Essentially, we didn't really know a lot about the concept, so our senior managers were quite keen. They'd been to some visits to Japan and seen some of the results. So we decided, it works, it seems to be very effective. So as I say, it started out in the UK, it moved to Europe, and then became global. So eventually we had a global initiative, which I'm sure we'll touch upon later on. But that's kind of my background relating to my involvement with TPM.
What was your first impression of TPM?
My first impression was it's very simple, but it can't be that simple. There are many such initiatives around, but they're very driven by maintenance, RCM and the likes, and line performance improvement programs. But a lot of these programs didn't drive you to the zero, and certainly didn't drive you to sustain the zero, which that's what I picked up from the pillar approach in TPM. I found it looked very simple, but I'm sure it would be very difficult, mainly around culture. So that was my first impressions. And then, of course, the Japanese approach, which I learned a lot from, say, Shiroshi Sensei and these people, was that, the Japanese is learned by doing. You learn by doing.
What were your thoughts, or maybe thoughts of people around you, about the promise of attaining those zeros?
I think initially the thought was impossible. So the zeros are impossible. But when we, through pilot activities, very selective pilot activities, we were able to show that zero was possible. For example, if you've got, let's talk about OEE, whatever. If you work in the OEEs of 40 to 50, getting to 60 to 70 can be regarded as a zero, given the position you started at. It's no good saying, well, we're going to go from 40 OEE to 80. That will then be seen to be impossible when you looked at the losses. But going from 40 to, say, 60 to 65, people began to believe, hey, we can do this. And maybe the last part of getting up to very high levels of OEE, yes, it would be difficult, but it will take time. But the initial successes were showing people that you could actually improve. And the zero was always the objective, but initially the improvement was the objective of from where you started to where you got to as you progress through the pillars. So once you were able to show people that you could do things and do things in a different way, in a systematic way, you got the confidence of the workers and the people to say, actually, this is possible. And another thing we found was that in Unilever then, communication between the sites, I would say, was not very good. Through the TPM process, we were able to set up concepts where we were sharing, let's call it best practices or improvements. And that really helped to accelerate the program. And also helped to convince our senior people that this was actually beginning to work. And as it happened, we then started to move from more and more UK plants came on board because it got around the UK. And then we moved into European plants. And then obviously we moved into, well, we went global through our FMCG companies. And once you show people that you can do these things and it's not impossible, you just gain the confidence, and then you can begin to really improve everywhere, actually. As our plants were improving, also, one of the biggest things, the biggest benefits of TPM is the improvement or change in the culture. And then we started then to apply the loss approach through TPM into supply chain, into logistics, and it moves on and it moves on. And we created loss trees for logistics. We created loss trees for innovation, how quickly and how effectively you can deliver innovation. And I think Unilever was one of the first companies to apply what I would call TPM concepts into the supply chain. And then, into the extended supply chain, right through the business of Unilever, not just manufacturing. In manufacturing, supply chain, R&D, people began to really understand, actually, it's not about plant maintenance. It's about maintaining good practices right throughout your business. We were able to see market increases in line performance through OEE, obviously through change over time reduction, which gave us more flexibility and adaptability to deliver to the marketplace. We were also able to see great improvements in quality because, again, the OEE calculation does include a quality component, and quality was certainly improved through the application of the quality pillar in TPM. That was probably another maybe stumbling block when we began, because if you had a quality pillar or a safety pillar, the problem used to occur was that most factories already had a quality department, but most factories already had a safety department, and most factories already had this department, a maintenance department. Initially, people often thought, well, what's this? Is this different? Is it the same? Is it another safety initiative? And there was a lot of education needed to happen to inform people that actually, no, it is the same, but it's just maybe a more systematic way of approaching quality or approaching safety through a loss process, not just measuring quality for the sake of measuring quality. So I think the application of losses or the use of losses in all the aspects really helped open people's eyes to say, oh, okay, I didn't really appreciate that was a loss. And then when you convert these losses into cost and then customer service and onwards and onwards, people began to really understand the loss concept. And that really enforced the concept of going to zero. So in Unilever, we had many, many examples where manufacturing performance was improved, quality certainly improved, supply chain responsiveness absolutely improved, and also it drove interaction between departments, because very rarely an R&D department would work with manufacturing, very rarely, because there was no commonality for them to work together. Once we had loss structures and saw where the commonality came, this is about improving and sustaining the improvement. It's about changing the culture in our plants and making our plants safer, happier places to work in. That was very, very positive, and we set up a global TPM organization, which I was involved in, where we were able to actually educate and train Unilever people globally, able to identify and transfer standards globally. So everybody was kind of using the same approach, and also the same, key performance indicators and what have you, because again, people are very creative about manipulation of KPIs, yeah? And, you can, if you want a number, you can have a number. But we were able to get through this. And in the end, it was a very, very successful, but tough and, tough implementation program globally. And one of the questions you asked me, I think when I I moved, we had about 160 plants globally, and obviously working through the TPM program. So it was deemed to be a great success, and I think it was a great success. And I think it still is a great success. The issue with every organization is that as time goes on, senior leadership are always looking for what's the next technique, what's next, and you have to be very careful that the methodology doesn't die on you, because a new set of leaderships coming in are also looking for new approaches. Yeah, and if you're not careful, these new approaches can wipe out all the hard work you've done in the past. And by the way, most of the new approaches are based on the old approaches, yeah, as the foundation. So I've often found, WCM and all these concepts, they're all TPM. They may change the name, they may change, this, that, or whatever, but when you get down to the baseline, it's fundamental, the foundation of TPM. Do not throw away, the baby with the bathwater, because again, new is innovative. You have to move forward. You have to change. You have to keep going forward. But it's still driven from the basics, and the basics are the foundation. And if you start breaking the foundations up, the buildings crumble. Yeah. So I've no problems whatsoever in people being innovative and changed, and which is fine, which is great. But please don't forget, let's say, the lessons of the past, and again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's what you find a lot of companies are doing. They're just discarding what they've got, saying, "Oh, now we move on to this," and that happens in companies, of course. But there's been so much good work done through TPM that has given many, I'll call manufacturing operations, I would say, the basics to do whatever they want moving forward, because they have the basics in place, And it was like when we were working with Shirozi, and then applying TPM in supply chain. TPMs should be credited with providing a lot of the foundations for people. Yeah, people can move on to different methodologies and approaches, but fundamentally they're nearly all based on the TPM approach. You're going through a cultural change program. You cannot go through that program without the engagement of your HR department. And HR was regarded as just a personnel department, hiring and firing, but the HR departments in Unilever were absolutely incredible support to the cultural change program, because that was their expertise. But because they tended to be separate from kind of the manufacturing operations, they very rarely got engaged with what was going on in the factories at the shop floor level. But through TPM and the cultural change programs, they were an integral part through that pillar. The T&E pillar was often run by the HR manager, for example. So that, again, coming from a loss tree for HR. Again, the loss tree approach was applied, or the loss approach was applied for every pillar. And then, once you had your loss structure in place, and you know this more than I know it, but once the loss structure was in place, you were away, because you had objectives to deliver. Now, how you did that, well, that was something else, but at least you knew what you had to do in a prioritized manner.
Unilever is one of the biggest consumer product manufacturers that we all, and everyone who will see this will probably have used in their daily lives. TPM has helped Unilever in its growth through the decades. Would you say this, I mean, I'm sure it's not just TPM, but would you say TPM played a good role or a great role in helping Unilever grow?
I certainly think it made a significant contribution from a manufacturing perspective and a supply chain perspective, yes. And maybe a lesser role in innovation, but certainly partial role in innovation. I would say the answer is yes. Simply, I think because of the word responsiveness. Unilever is changing, it's divesting businesses, but it's still very responsive. It became the Gartner #1 best supply chain in the world. It hasn't done that. They're just sitting there. It's been working very, very hard in all the functions within supply chain, of which manufacturing is one. So to answer your question, I would say yes, certainly TPM has provided a basics. Even the integration of the approach to losses. When you start talking about losses, people don't really understand, well, what do you mean? What do you mean a loss? What's a loss? And for many, many years, things have been done without actually realizing, well, that loss is given as a cost. And that cost, is a waste when we go to Muda and what have you. And these sorts of concepts is that every loss has an associated cost. Even a loss in safety could be a fatality or an accident, which is a loss, as a cost, it's got a personal cost and it's got a financial cost as well. So through the application of loss concepts, I think has really helped Unilever begin to understand, let's say, where it's losing money and where it needs to improve. And I think TPM has certainly supported, let's say, from a manufacturing base and supply chain, certainly a portion of the growth of Unilever. I really do. Capture and transfer what we do well would not be there. Other than maybe a personal contact that I know someone somewhere else who does this, but very informal, very personal. So the inability to capture and transfer, I'll call best practices, the inability to identify good people for the business and then transfer and develop those people across different sites would not be there. I don't know how we would have gone forward without TPM, to be very honest.
With TPM being a 50-year-old method now, so it's some people may see it as an old method or too traditional. Do you think it's still effective in the current manufacturing industry?
That's a good question, but I don't know the answer. You probably know that better than me. But I just think the acronym TPM, if it can be used more in supply chain innovation through loss process, fine. I love TPM because it provides the rigor, tools, and standards that deliver and sustain continuous improvements. No shortcuts.